click on the car that you want to edit. You'll see that it's broken down into sections: chassis, suspension, tyres, etc. When you're making your first car, I would suggest taking a Canopy default car and swapping out each section one by one until it's 100% your car. Or better still, work at a subsection level. And the reason for doing that is that if you run a simulation to check that your parameters are working okay, you'll be able to identify which part of the car is problematic if the simulation throws a problem. Going through each of these sections: chassis is ride height, mass, weight distribution. You'll see this properties button, and this is where you can add or remove complexity to the vehicle model. So if by default we assume the car is symmetric and you define the right hand side of the car, but if you want to make it asymmetric and have the ride height on the left hand side, then that adds in that complexity to the model. You can remove complexity from the model, so if you want to keep it nice and simple initially, you could maybe delete the under tray, and if you're worried about bottoming at a later date, you can always add that back in. The units are all customizable. Sometimes there isn't a units option in some of the maps. If in doubt, it's SI units. Suspension. By default, this is broken down into external and internal, so it's assuming a push rod and rocker arrangement. Outboard of the rocker, i.e. the wheel side, is the external pickup points for the suspension members. Internal is the other side of the rocker, so suspension components, springs, dampers. If your topology is not like that, then we've got a list of different options. So if you picked McPherson strut, then you would only be defining that external suspension. Tyres, we've got 3 tyre models, Canopy and 2 Pajeca models. I prefer the Canopy tyre model, and the reason being is that it's the bare minimum parameters required to define a sensible shaped tyre curve. It means you can get to good correlation quite quickly and understand what's going on. That said, there are plenty of people who are experts at tweaking Pajeca tyres, and if you're lucky enough for your tyre manufacturer to provide a .tir file, you can import that directly into Canopy. And if you're curious to know what tweaking the Canopy tyre model would look like, you can press that convert to Canopy button. Aero. So this is a polynomial aero map. We can add or remove terms. So the most basic aero map would just be a constant downforce coefficient, and we can add in complexity as we go. And we've got error message there. Hopefully it's telling me that the syntax is wrong. Okay, that's better. If you're not sure about what terms you can use in the error map, you can click this buck icon and it will take you to this section in the help that's relevant. So this gives you a list of terms that you can use in that map. If you want a more complex error map, you can click the radial basis function option to add in that additional detail on top of the polynomial base map. Brakes, nice and simple: radius of the caliper, area of the pistons, and mu of the disc. But you can add some complexity there. You can have a thermal model of the brakes and the friction. There are various places in the car where you can model the thermal behavior. Control, we've got sort of brake balance and brake balance optimization, so you could get the simulation to pick the quickest brake balance, or you could even get it to pick through stock brake balance that gives the best lap time. Powertrain, ICE, electric transmissions. If you're working with a purely electric car, you can remove that ICE. If it's got direct drive motors, you maybe don't need the transmission. and you can customize it to whatever you need. So each section of the car has got this import and export snippets. So you can export a .json text file for any part of the car or the whole car, and you can edit that in a text editor and import it back into the car. You can alternatively save components onto the cloud. So you might want to save this as chassis 1, and if you're loading in another car, you might want to load that chassis onto there. That can easily be loaded onto a different car. And you can save off like individual sections of the car. So if you wanted to have a database of anti-roll bars, you could put in the stiffness. You can add in notes and custom properties, so that it's, you give it the name that your team refer to that anti-roll bar as. So in effect, you're building up a database of components that you can add onto your car. I showed you the filters there. You can add in, if you know what parameter you're looking for or what section of the car you're after, that can help avoid having to navigate through the whole tree. I've probably trashed this car with all the clicking that I've done. Let's reload it. And I'd like to show you the really important button now, which is Verify Car. And what this does is it checks through your parameters and it runs a straight sim. So it's worth clicking this button often to check that your car is still working. That straight sim worked fine. We've got some other tabs on here, so we can take a look at the torque curve, tire curves, suspension kinematics, car config. So this is just showing the right hand side of the car. What you can do is you can pin those results. So let's call that the baseline. And if you want to look at the effect of changing a parameter, you can say let's change that front ride height by 2 millimeters, and we'll resimulate that. And I'll save that car. And then we can see that front ride height has changed 2 millimeters. The reason I saved that car is I wanted to show you the version history. So we can look at previous saved cars and we can compare it to the existing car. There's only one change in here. There may be dozens of changes, and you can click on car to switch between which ones you want to apply, or you can click on these individual parameters. So let's say I want to go back to the original ride height, then I can stage that output.